Yeah, and it was not quite what I was going for. It's a little more, Jody says that's quite angled at the top, like my head is going.
Yeah, well, it's a look.
That's one way to put it.
Councillor Newton is so polite.
No, I'm not.
The good thing about hair, it grows back and you can.
Yeah,
Oh,
it
I know.
does.
Jody told me in a week it'll be perfect.
Right.
You want to hear it's perfect tonight and looking hip. Go with it.
He timed it just so it's perfect right at Christmas.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. I like your tree, Council President Lube. It's pretty.
I have just took it out of the box. I have not done anything else to it other than stuck it together and plugged it in. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. I was explaining, I was talking to the mayor the other day that I'm normally a diehard tree person where I used to actually go up, stop at the Forest Service, get the tag, and my family would go up a random, snowy street and cut it down. And I just, the thought of keeping something else alive and out of my daughter's mouth, I didn't have the mental energy for it. So I bought a tree.
Last year during COVID, I always wanted a tree just with the lights, so that's what I did. No ornaments, just lights. Nobody came to see it, so
Just for you.
Yeah, me and Scott. That's it. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I might end up doing that. I mean, I have 3 days. So
It's just hard to replace the smell, that wonderful tree, fresh cut tree smell.
agreed. But I do have a couple of pine candles that maybe we can attempt.
There you go.
But yeah, anything on the floor, her little pincher, she pinches and it either goes to her mouth or she wants to hand it to us. So I can't imagine the nightmare of all of the needles on the ground.
Hey, Keelan, how are we doing on time here? Are we broadcasting yet?
We are streaming right now, and I believe we would have started broadcasting for TVC TV about 10 seconds ago.
All right, I will call this Tigard City Council meeting to order. City Recorder Kreger, please call roll.
Council President Lube.
Yes, here.
Councillor Shaw.
Here.
Mayor Snyder.
Here.
Youth Councillor Nog. Youth Councillor, are you there? I don't see her picture.
Carol, given what she had told me last week, it's possible she may not be here this week either.
Oh, okay, thank you. Councillor Newton.
Here.
All right, let's see. Keelan, can you put the flag up on the screen and I'll ask everyone to mute themselves. And just...
Did I miss myself for roll call? Oh, can anyone hear me?
Yes, I think I may have skipped because I was looking at Youth Councillor Nog's line. Councillor Goodhouse.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So we've got the flag up. I'll ask everyone to mute and participate in the Pledge of Allegiance. All right. Thank you, Keelan. Staff or council, any non-agenda items? All right. We'll take verbal public comment in a moment. Anyone that wishes to do so may call in at 503-966-4101. And those with general comments should call now to get into the queue. Assistant City Manager Nyland, do you have any follow-up to previous public comment?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and councilors. There was no public comment received at our last council meeting. And my fact for tonight is, as you know, today is December 21st. Happy winter solstice, one of my favorite days of the year. Today is the shortest day of the year in the Northern Hemisphere. It's the official start of winter. And the solstice means longer days ahead, and summer is only 6 months away. Yay! So stay warm, stay safe, and happy, healthy holidays to you all. That is my report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to written public comment, and we did receive written public comment. I think that should, I think City Recorder Kreger, we only received one written public comment, correct?
That's correct.
And I think that that should be reviewed as part of agenda item number 3 and reviewed by the council at that time. So I'm going to suggest that that be held since it's related to that topic. Mr. Cleary, are there any phone-in public comments?
It looks like one person is calling in and giving their name right now, so they probably need another 10 seconds to finish calling in.
Okay. Let me know when we're ready.
They have just finished dialing in, so I'm going to patch them through right now.
Hi, good evening. You've just joined the Tigard City Council meeting. Do you have some public comment? Please state your name for the record.
Yes. This is Michael Antonelli, Tigard resident. Do you need my address?
No, that's okay, Michael, but go ahead with your testimony.
Okay, I did submit this electronically as well, but I'm basically just going to read what I submitted electronically just because I wanted it to be part of the meeting. And my comment is on the term limits issue that was listed in the agenda. So, dear Mayor and City Council, I was confused about the December 21st agenda item seeking to clarify the meaning of consecutive years. It seems entirely clear to me what the intent of the 12-year term limit statute is. So why is the City Council suddenly taking up this matter 4 days before Christmas with virtually no public conversation leading up to it? The optics are not good. It's very troubling that the city manager, city attorney, and anyone else involved in this agenda item's language thought this was a good idea. Redefining the term consecutive years to mean that any break, including resignation 1 day before a term ends, resets the 12-year term limit clock, is not only a perversion of the city's term limit statute, but also sets the terrible precedent of allowing any council member to run indefinitely, essentially rendering all term limits void. It will become the new standard for any city council member to resign a day before their term ends if they have any inclination to run again. It is evident that quite a bit of work and research went into this agenda item, which makes it even more troubling. It was 93 pages long, and I didn't quite make it all. You anticipated the questionable ethics of having at least 2 council members voting on an issue that would directly benefit themselves. I'm still trying to figure out how the Oregon Government Ethics Commission signed off on this. In closing, I completely understand the potential short-sightedness of limiting a mayor to a single term after serving 2 terms as city councilor. I also appreciate the problematic dynamic of being a mayor elected in an off 2-year election cycle. And my terminology on that phrase, I wasn't quite sure about. It's probably a better way to phrase it. These are reasonable matters to discuss for amendment in the city charter, but the city and council should do this through public conversation and the election process, not by stealthily slipping it in at the 11th hour with no public feedback and using highly questionable wordplay on the definition of consecutive years. I believe Tigard deserves better. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Antonelli. And we do have your written public comment, and I'm sure it will get due consideration in the council work that's ahead. Mr. Cleary, are there any other callers for public comment?
There are no other callers at this time.
Okay. So I'm going to move us on to item number 5, which is to discuss and provide direction on city council term limit definitions. As Mr. Antonelli referenced, there's been some question to the Oregon Government Ethics Commission about whether or not my participation and other members of the council's participation in this topic represents an actual conflict of interest or a perceived conflict of interest. The distinction there matters just as a principle in Oregon sort of government ethics speak about whether or not a member of the council can participate or cannot. I'm stating all this because while I think the conclusion from the city attorney and the ethics commission is that I could participate, I am personally making a choice to not participate because I don't want to have even the appearance of a potential conflict of interest in this deliberation and discussion. And for that reason, I'm going to be handing item number 3 on the agenda over to Council President Lube to facilitate. I will remain in the meeting. I'm going to turn my camera off so that there's no potential conflict with even nonverbal cues. I will mute myself and listen. And I also will make myself available if there were to be a factual question that somehow some member of the council or staff might need an answer, and I will turn my camera on just for that and answer it. But with that, I'm going to hand item number 3 on the agenda off to Council President Lube to facilitate, and I will take the meeting back after this item is resolved completely.
Thank you, Mayor Snyder. I believe City Manager Reimer is going to be the one presenting this item. So if you'd like to go ahead and, Councilor Goodhouse, it looks like you have a question. Would you like to speak before we get started?
Yes, since this topic was brought up and both the mayor and myself were mentioned whether or not we could or could not participate. And I was believing that we both were. And since the mayor is not participating, then I will do the same and recuse myself as we both have interest in this matter.
Okay, thank you. If you would like to follow the mayor's leading, go ahead and turn off your camera and mute yourself. Thank you so much. City Manager Reimer, please proceed.
Well, good evening, Council President and councilors. Thank you for the introduction to this item. Just a quick brief background on why we brought it forward today. As many of you know, Chapter 3, Section 7 of our charter discusses our terms and the term limits. And there's some ambiguity in the term consecutive years. And so we're bringing this forward tonight to seek your guidance on how to define that. It was suggested maybe to redefine, we are not looking at it that way. We're looking at it as a way to define what consecutive years looks like. And there's really 2 pieces as we laid out in the AIS. There's a procedural piece. And so the council could decide that you would like to define consecutive years through adopting a resolution that does so, or you could decide that you would refer this measure to the voters as another way to define it. So that's the procedural piece of the conversation. And then there's the substantive piece of what actually constitutes consecutive years. And so either way, if it was in a resolution or something that was posed to the voters, we would need clear guidance on that as well, so we could develop those documents for future consideration. I also wanted to touch base on the timing of this. As you know, this is a conversation that will start tonight, but it may not conclude tonight. And so as we looked at the timing, we thought it was important to start the conversation now in December. If either way, if you look at having a resolution brought back, or even more importantly, if you're looking at bringing a measure to the voters, we will need some additional time, and time is relatively short of that by the time we need to have something for the May ballot. So we thought starting tonight would be a good point, and then we'll see what the next steps are. So I just wanted to provide a little clarity to that as to why this is on the agenda here on December 21st. And with that, the city attorney and I are both available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all the background to help give us additional context on what the previous discussions have been. And I'd like to thank Michael Antonelli for his thoughtful citizen communication and really letting us know his opinion. I appreciate that. And so with that, I'd like to go ahead and open up the floor for conversation. And I think addressing the two questions that City Manager Reimer has brought to us, because I think this is a very complex issue and we can go down a lot of rabbit holes. So if we could stick to the conversation on, you know, do we want to define it? Do we want to refer to the voters? And then the next step would be sort of the details on either how we would want to define it or framework in which we would want to bring to the voters in May. So Councillor Newton, would you like to go first?
Sure, thank you, Council President Lube. And I want to also acknowledge Mr. Antonelli and appreciate his comments. And I will say that I felt like this was the beginning point of a conversation. And as you may or may not know, I was on staff for a while. And so I requested that the staff find any information they could in the records about this issue. And I apologize for the 93 pages, but it wasn't new research. It was information that I thought might help us as we had this conversation. And so thank you for your comments. I appreciate them. And again, you have me to thank for the 93 pages, and I apologize. So I agree, Council President Lube. I think there's two issues. There's the definition of consecutive years. And then as I looked at all of the information that was provided, the interesting thing is it depends on situations and circumstances. I don't know if you noticed, but Councillor Wilson was appointed and then elected to an unexpired term and had some of his own terms. And so I think the two things that I think I believe that we probably have time to put something together to have the voters consider in May. But I think we do want to stick to the definition of consecutive years, and then also touch on the last sentence in that paragraph and maybe have some opportunities for folks to weigh in and maybe a public meeting when they talk about limitations do not apply to the filling of unexpired term. Because depending on the situation, if you're midterm and you resign, or you're at the end of a term, or you're appointed, the math can be different. So I think because we've got some situations that play out differently, it might be great to find some language to ask the voters about that particular issue. Is it complete term? Is it unexpired term? Does it matter if you're appointed or elected? Not to parse all that out right this second, but I do think that's where things get confusing. So I think having a discussion about we've gone to the voters too, and it failed in, I can't remember the year, that they didn't want to add terms. So they're pretty clear on the 2 terms as council, 2 terms as mayor, and what the combination looks like. So I think that was pretty clear, but and I think it looks to me like the read is you don't want to run for a 3rd term to a council spot. I'll also say that I have a concern about people resigning too early. If I'm a city councilor and I resign next January before I complete my 4th year and we've got a 4-member council, that's problematic as well. So I think we need to think about that in light of unexpired terms versus full terms, partial terms, that kind of thing. So I would like to ask the voters, I would like us to be able to come up with a proposal for the voters to weigh in on in May, because that would be enough time in advance of the filing for our next election so people would be clear. Does that help as a starting point? You know, I'm not done talking, but that's...
Thank you. It does. You answer the first part of the question that we asked, which is, do we define consecutive years as a council, or do we ask the voters? And you have chosen to ask the voters. Councillor Shaw, would you like to give us your opinion?
Yes, thank you, Council President Lube. And Councillor Noon, I very much actually appreciate your question of asking the staff to provide guidance. It was very helpful to go back, I'd say 20 years plus, to review the records. And clearly that points to a couple of different things. One, that the citizens of Tigard, the public, definitely support term limits, and that they turned down a ballot initiative that would have extended them, as well as trying to be clear as to what that definition was. We have recognized there's some ambiguities, and that has been raised by, as you mentioned, whether it's resignations, whether it's those who have been appointed, unfortunate deaths. Thank you for asking that the staff provide that information. Also want to thank Michael Antonelli for his comments. I too, the time may be auspicious, but if you look at timing from the May ballot, it was key to bring it up at this time and not wait for the new year. So with that, I would agree with Councillor Newton. I think I would like to also go out to the voters and have them define what consecutive years means. I think we all have different opinions, and so I think that would make sense. As well as to her point of people resigning early, I think that needs to be addressed, because there is some penalty for some cases and some penalties for not in others. And I don't think any of us want to be in the penalty mode for that. And then I think it would make sense to even potentially have I don't know if we want to call it a charter review or a special charter committee be established to help develop the framework and help the council. So with that, I'll pass it back over to you, Council President Lube.
Thank you so much. I agree with both of you. I think that this is something that we need the residents of Tigard to help us define and to define what they mean or what is intended with the charter. That being said, I also agree with you, Councillor Shaw, that I think there's some inequity in the charter as well, just as far as which council seat, which cycle you're on, and the mayor, like which one the mayor is on. And there's just some inequity having to resign and all those sorts of things. So I certainly support, once this is taken care of, to have a charter review and really take a look at, so there is no ambiguity. It's very clear, and we come through an equity lens of what makes the most sense for Tigard now. It does look like, I believe, Beaverton just this last year had a major charter review. In the notes, Tualatin has had one recently. So there's definitely something where, and we do reviews all the time of our code, that, what was it, you weren't allowed to whistle in, or there was something weird, right, in the parks that you weren't allowed to do. So it's not uncommon for us to look back on these things and really say, this no longer makes sense. How do we continue to serve our community in the best way? And so I think a charter review long-term is the way to go, but in front of us, we do need to define with the voters' assistance what consecutive years and what the length and break is. So I wholeheartedly agree. So I believe we can give that direction to this. Oh, yes, Councillor Newton?
I just wanted to say a couple of more things. Obviously, I think before we put something on the ballot, we have to come up with some language. And so that's why I suggested we perhaps have a couple of meetings where we put something out there. We think this is what the intent is, and that's maybe a good starting point and give people an opportunity to weigh in. And then I do think the interesting thing in the notes was we started these terms in 1990, and then I think it was in 95 or 96, we moved from positions to just top vote getters. And that's kind of where things get complicated. And as you pointed out, Council President Lube, a little inequitable, because it just sort of depends on where you land. And so getting clarification from the voters on how do they want that to work, we might be able to take care of that initially in that last sentence in language that we propose to the voters. So, anyway, that would be my suggestion. So.
I think that's really helpful. Do we want to give the staff some direction or some general ideas? Are the meetings that you're proposing taking place in January with the community? Because I believe we have to have the information by the end of February, written and vetted to be put on the ballot. So this is something that we need to have some meetings, I believe, pretty quickly.
I was thinking maybe the second or third week, third or fourth week in January, and then maybe another one in early February if we need. We're going to have to do it pretty quickly, but I was thinking, maybe that's what we could do. There's the city manager. You might have a different thought.
Yeah, I also
We're
believe our
volunteering
first
you,
couple,
city manager.
I believe our first couple meetings in January are pretty packed. So I'm not, unless we were to hold a special meeting, I'm not sure they'd be able to get a whole bunch of guidance from us on what we want the discussion to be at those meetings. But I'll let City Manager Reimer speak to that.
I want to start with the deadline we have for getting a measure on the May ballot. And to my understanding, thanks to Kathy, that it's February 8th. And so in early February, we have to have that language submitted. So obviously work to do before then. So any process that we come up with tonight, we should really probably focus on the early parts of January to allow us some leeway, if you will, in those final edits to any language that the council can ultimately approve and we can submit in time. So it may mean special meetings like Council President just said. Right now, the meeting on the 4th is rather busy, and I believe the 11th is, and I'll verify as we're having a conversation here. But we will find a way to make it work, just depending exactly where the three of you want to go with the conversation.
Mr. Reimer, I just checked and the 11th has 30 minutes on it and the 18th is still only has 65 minutes allocated for the 180-minute meeting. So those 3 meetings in January have a little bit of time.
Okay, and I'll verify some of that. Sometimes there's moving parts to those, but it looks like maybe the 11th and 18th would be meetings that you could take this up at. Anything
I really, yeah, I really think if we can start to form opinions or ideas tonight, because I certainly understand the 11th, but that's not giving staff a whole bunch of time, and that's really not giving our community members much time. I mean, you know this, but I'm sort of a muller, right? Like I like to read something and sit with it for a little while before I can really form a solid opinion. And we may have other community members like that who would like some time or may need to rearrange their schedule in order to attend these meetings. So I think we fairly need to give them information and as much time as possible to anticipate and to think through, what we're asking them. Because this is a very serious question in regards to what we're asking them to define. With that being said, Councillor Shaw or Councillor Newton, do you have general ideas on what you feel like consecutive years may be interpreted as? Councillor Shaw, would you like to go?
Sure, Councillor Newton was quickly unmuting. Well, I think the intent is consecutive year is back-to-back year. I know there is some definitions between the Merriam Dictionary and others, but I think going and understanding the intent and going back to those 93 pages prior to 1990 when the votes had changed, because we went to the top 2 vote getters. So I think that is something that would certainly be helpful, but I believe that the intent is you cannot just resign the day, December 22nd or the day of, and then turn around and restart your term. And so I think that could be a key element.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillor Newton, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think, I'm linking the two, but I won't do it right for this second. But I think that after going through all the information, I agree with Councillor Shaw that I think the intent was not to do what I said, where I resign next year and then, run again. So I think the idea was that there would be a consecutive year or a year. That's what I think the intent was after reading it. I think the issue becomes the inequality of how people land where they do, but I do think consecutive year is a year. So.
And do we need to also add in the definition, is it being asked what a length of service is sufficient for a reset? Are those linked, the consecutive years and the break in service?
Well, I think the issue for me is then we get down to the next paragraph and it depends on, the fact that you have to resign to run for another seat. And that's where we get into the inequity. If you look at all the different circumstances, deaths and being appointed and then being elected. So I think we need to couple, is it an unexpired term or is it a partial term? So I think we have to have a discussion about that as well. So these limitations do not apply to the filling of how did I end up in an unexpired term? Was I appointed? Was I elected? Like Councillor Wilson was appointed and then he was elected and over about a 3-year period. So, and then there was some deaths in office and different things like that. So does it matter to the voters if it was a partial term or an unexpired term, or how does that work? Because if I have to resign to run for another term, like some folks did in the past, then if I would have been sitting differently, I would not have had the same situation. I'm not being very articulate right now. And does that matter to the voters? Maybe it doesn't. But when you look at the history, there were so many different circumstances and situations that came up, depending, and that affected how long people were able to serve.
Do we think that that's something that belongs with the Charter Review Committee, or is that something that we would need to tackle in the question to the voters in May?
Well, I think if it's going to stay part of that paragraph, we need to, I think if it's going to stay there, I think that needs to be defined. But maybe that's something that could be addressed differently. But I think if it's going to stay in that paragraph, it needs to be defined. That's just my thought.
Councillor Shaw?
Thank you, Council President Lubin. I would concur with Councillor Newton that I think we should define on the ballot the consecutive years, but I wonder if we can't decouple that, because I think we want to have more time to have a charter review look at the different circumstances, whether you're on a special election cycle or a different election cycle, or if you're appointed, or if you fulfilled a term because someone passed. So I just think that's good. That could be trouble or problematic getting to by February, that early February 8th date. But we could certainly strive with perhaps one goal being define consecutive years, and then the second goal being defining those other special elements. And if we can't get there, then we could have a charter review, or I'm not sure what we'd call them, but review it at that point.
Yeah, one of the things that I found, I think, most interesting is when I think there was 57 respondents to the question that was asked to the community years ago. And it was very clear that there was a whole lot of confusion just around the verbiage and what it was. And some of the responses, this is something we deal with every day. And so we're intimately involved understanding some of these terms, but it's not something that we should expect the average Tigard resident to deeply understand. And so I think there's certainly an education piece that I think probably fits better with, the whole charter review, to explain why we need a charter review, because it is confusing and it is inequitable, and this is why, and use that as an education. I think that's something that as a council we've done really well over the past several years, is develop that trust with the community by bringing them in, educating them on these complicated things, and allowing them to make these decisions when we take it to the voters. So I think rather than sending them some stuff that's really confusing that we haven't had adequate time sort of to build an educational campaign around, trying to keep the May issue as clean as possible, I think would be my preference. So if we could really define or put forward and say, this is what, vote yes or no, and if you agree this is the interpretation of consecutive years, I think may be the best way to go and a stepping stone to a full charter review.
Yeah, my point was just, if we're going to leave that in, I think we need to do some work on it, because that's where you get into the inequality. So, and I agree, it is confusing. I keep forgetting that I used to work there, and my name was all over a lot of those staff reports. So to me, it's clear to me that it's confusing, and all the circumstances being different. The other thing I think that will happen is, if we're more equitable about how people land in their situations, we won't get the concern about, are we going to go to an election? Are we going to appoint? Because that's confusing for people too, because the council has a lot of latitude there. And, that may be something the Charter Review Committee also wants to talk about, is how we look at those vacancies. So, yeah.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I think it's, and as somebody who was appointed to, fill the mayor's term, I'm deeply aware of, what this kind of means. It's just very confusing for someone who does math for a living, what it ends up looking like. And so I agree. So I think we're on consensus of, we certainly want to take this to the voters, and we want to ask them to help us define consecutive years, whether or not they agree with the interpretation that we're going to propose to the community and have some meetings and possibly some fine tweaks. What I also heard is a general consensus of what consecutive year is. I'm also in agreement. I can't remember if I spoke, but a consecutive year to me is a full calendar year after year. And so I think being able to give the staff that guidance to start to look at and run with, and hopefully get some community meetings scheduled as quickly as possible to be able to start that conversation. Do we want to give them any direction on how many meetings are we hoping to have? And are we hoping for virtual/hybrid or virtual only? Is this going to be noticed as a special meeting with all of us there as counselors, or I guess the three of us to be able to answer questions? Are there thoughts around that? Councillor Shaw, you're nodding your head.
Yes, I agree with all your comments, Council President Lube, and I think given the fact that we have the governor is of course called into yet again an emergency situation, I think we need to ensure that it's at least a hybrid so that there is virtual opportunity to go to Councilor Newton's point about equity, so those folks who can participate. And I'm willing to have as many meetings, as this will take to define what that consecutive term means, or consecutive years as the term means, and involve as many as the public as possible.
Are we also open to something in addition to meetings, like a survey that's sent out, so people who are unable to attend the meetings can, okay. So sure. I think we should also direct the city teammates to put together a communication plan and find multiple ways to reach out and solicit opinions and information.
And I'm thinking, if we did something a little bit more on the informal side, with a meeting like a Zoom and, hybrid and a survey, just to get people's thoughts. And then maybe we do, when we actually take more formal action, that could be a little bit more formal. We could still take comments, but maybe we do kind of two things. We take more of okay, this is a conversation. What do you think? And get people to be able to feel comfortable asking us questions around the confusion they might have, and why is this a problem or whatever. And then as we're really evaluating the language, make that a little bit more formal, but we could still take comments.
City Manager Reimer, do you feel like you've gotten the direction you need to start to move forward? The questions answered, you came to us, or at least the direction?
Yeah, I think it's a start in that direction for us. What I have is, just to reiterate what was just said, is to come up with a communications plan that includes a survey, some meetings, more informal in nature to start with, more of a formal, maybe near the end, obviously, when you're making your decision on what we refer to the voters. I would like to make a comment in regards to the hybrid or in-person, just because of resurgence of COVID again. Unfortunately, the holiday season is here. It's the winter months, all a bad recipe for where we're heading here. I would suggest that we continue in this fashion, remote, just because of the health and safety concerns, but still try to keep it informal, invite the community in. And we can talk about if it's different days than council meetings, if you would like to do more of a workshop type informal setting before a meeting. We could also look at structuring something like that. That could start at the 6 o'clock hour and start the other meeting at 7 or something. So we can look at options, and myself, Kathy, and a few others will work with the three of you to determine the best path. But I've heard, I guess the bottom line is heard that multiple times, trying to communicate and talk with our community is best. So you'll be well informed for your ultimate decision in late January.
Great. Any further comments, Councillor Shaw or Councillor Newton?
No, thank you, Council President Lube. I just had a question. I'm not sure if Michael Antonelli was still online if he had some additional comments post reading his note, but that was just a question I had.
City Attorney Rahala?
Thank you. I just had one clarification is the discussion tonight has focused on defining. I'm wondering if council is also open to changing the words in the charter. For example, in looking at other cities, Beaverton uses consecutively elected 4-year terms, which I think is much clearer than the way Tigers is currently written. So would council also be open to something like that where we actually amend the word charter, or do you just want to focus on interpretation of the existing charter?
Well, I think if it makes it more clear, I would be open to it. And the other thing is, it also might start to work at addressing what we're talking about is the inequity. So, then it isn't as big of a issue, I think. So if we could get a different language that makes it more clear, and we get feedback from folks that it is more clear, then absolutely, I'd be open to that.
Councillor Shaw, you were nodding your head. Did you have anything to add on top of that?
No, I absolutely agree with Councillor Newton's point, and to City Attorney Rahala, I think that's an excellent suggestion, and thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's open to less interpretation when it's written in the charter rather than us having to define at the bottom what that means. So thank you for that clarification. Okay, I think with that direction that we've given, that concludes our discussion number 3. And with that, I will hand the meeting back over to you, Mayor Snyder.
Thank you, Council President Lube. We have no non-agenda items. We're going to move into executive session. Tigard City Council is going to go into executive session to discuss the performance evaluation of a public officer or employee under ORS 192.660 subsection 2I. All discussions are confidential and those present may disclose nothing from the session. Representatives of the news media are allowed to attend executive sessions as provided by ORS 192.660 subsection 4, but must not disclose any information discussed. No executive session may be held for the purpose of taking any final action or making any final decision. Executive sessions are closed to the public. The Tigard City Council will adjourn immediately after the executive session. Good night, Tigard.